Now, you don't need a background in mathematics, computer science, music theory, and political science to understand this showcase, but it would help. Fundamentally, there are 4 steps to expressing meaning in the Conchord language: glossing, LARS, encoding, and decoding. Each step is somewhat involved and has its own procedure, so it would be most productive to explain them by translating an example text, namely, this excerpt from one of the Twilight books. For ease of translation, I will use the following abridged version. I securely knew 3 things. The first thing, that Edward is a vampire. The second thing, that he wanted my blood to an unknown degree. The third thing, that I securely and unendingly loved him. We'll gloss these items one part of speech at a time. Firstly, Conchord is head marking like Abkhaz and Navajo and thus strongly pro-drop. Next, all numerals take a suffix indicating whether they are cardinal, describing a quantity, or ordinal, indicating an order. This translation contains at least one of each. Nouns are fairly simple. They take a prefix for either possessor or definiteness, a suffix for number, pockle or non-pockle, and one of 4 noun cases. Note that none of these are for core role marking, i.e. subject or direct object. That happens on the verb. The verb's prefixes handle the arguments, i.e. the subjects and objects, while the suffixes handle everything else. The main prefixes, apart from the person markers themselves, add or subtract arguments from the verb. Speaking of person marking, apart from the first and second person, Conchord distinguishes 5 classes of nouns based on musicianship: inept or incapable of music, beginner, advanced, expert, and master. This classification is based on the speaker's opinion of the referent's musical ability, but the Conchord-speaking community uses it as a metaphor for the general opinion of the referent. Conchord verbs can take up to 4 suffixes: a suffix to specify the number of one of the arguments, an aspect suffix, a negation suffix, and a modal suffix, used for both verbal mood and non-finite verb forms. Syntax is very simple: subject, object, verb, word order, and exclusively head final constructions. This means that none of the syntax trees are shaped like bananas this year. Now that all of the affixes have been applied, we must take a step back and come to the horrible realization that there's actually a super embarrassing error in this gloss. The verb in the 3rd sentence is all wrong, and if I don't fix it right now, my family name will be forever stained by this hideous mess. Thankfully, this is a simple error with a simple fix. Conchord uses fluid S marking based on volition, meaning that the subject of an involuntary object is marked on the verb as the object and the subject is null. Transitive involuntary verbs use a special applicative for the direct object, labeled as envol-obj. The old version of the verb implied that Bella deliberately chose to fall in love with Edward, when in reality, Bella does not exist due to being a fictional character, so she cannot actively decide to fall in love with the sexy vampire, hence the non-volitional marking. The very last step of glossing is to deal with proper nouns. We replace the name Edward with this thing. Don't worry, it'll be explained later. So now that we have a complete gloss, it's time for us to relive the horrifying realization that we actually don't. And to find out why, it's time for me to introduce you to LARS. LARS is short for Lateral Affix Rotation System. The principle of LARS is very simple. Move the various prefixes and suffixes off of the root they're normally associated with to a different one altogether. Specifically, move the jth prefix of any given word j words back to become the jth prefix of the new word, and likewise move the kth suffix k words ahead to make it the kth suffix of the new word. For example, the second suffix of a word pre-LARS becomes the second suffix of the word 2 spaces ahead post-LARS. This may be a lot to take in, so I'll demonstrate the process on the first sentence as seen here. Starting with the first prefix, we move those 1 word back. Next, we take the second prefix and move it 1, 2 words back. We do something similar for the suffixes. We take the first suffixes and move them 1 word ahead. Now if we reach the end of the sentence, we wrap around to the beginning, and vice versa for prefix movement. Then, we take the second suffixes and move them 1, 2 words ahead. Finally, we take the third suffixes and move them 1, 2, 3 words ahead. We are almost done. Notice how the third word in the sentence has a first and third suffix but no second suffix. All such missing suffixes are filled in with the null morpheme. We then apply this simple procedure, one sentence at a time, to the rest of the translation, and we get the twisted consequences of our hubris. Note that in the loanword construction, the suffix representing 5 is still directly attached to the special root just as it was before. These numbers are the only suffixes in the language not impacted by LARS, being treated as part of the loanword stem. Having witnessed the senseless chaos of LARS, you must be thinking, please Penny, let the rest of this Conlang be normal. But since my name is not Penny, I cannot make any such guarantees. On the contrary, this next step will take us back to the year 1951. That year, MIT student David A. Huffman was taking an information theory class and was given a choice between taking the final exam or writing a term paper proving which binary code is most efficient. In so doing, he invented Huffman coding, a way to assign binary codes to a set of elements based on frequency. The exact algorithm is beyond the scope of this video, but the effect is that more frequent elements are assigned shorter codes, and since no two codes are prefixes of each other, the conversion is lossless. Which brings us back to the third step of Conchord translation, encoding. Each morpheme is assigned a binary code derived using Huffman's algorithm on the entire set of morphemes in the language with semi-random weights. Each morpheme is then substituted with the appropriate code, taking us from this confusing monstrosity to this perfectly clear expression of meaning. The one irregularity is the le do fa ra do in the second sentence, which is still connected to the sentence but is set to the side for now. But it's not over yet, because the number of bits in each sentence must be evenly divisible by 10. The first sentence happens to satisfy this at 110 bits, but for the rest, there are 2 strategies to pad it out. Add 3-bit null characters to the front or end, or add any single 4-bit string to the end of the sentence, since no 4-bit codes are in use, and no 2 valid codes can be distinguished by adding or removing the last 4 bits. Adding the extra nodes in 4-bit segments makes the translated text look like this, which raises a pretty obvious question: how the hell do you even pronounce it? Well, why do you think it's called Conchord? Meaning in Conchord is encoded in the form of chords in the harmony of a piece of music. Very basically, chords are a stack of notes that are played together below or behind the melody. The sequence of 1s and 0s generated by encoding is actually instructions on what chords to play and how. Chords are decoded in consecutive segments of 10 bits. The speaker selects a root note, and the first 8 bits indicate which notes should be present and how high they are above the root. The last 2 bits indicate whether these notes should be played as a block, from bottom to top to bottom, or alternating up and down. The duration of the chord, melody, instrumentation, style, etc. can be whatever the speaker wants. The only restriction is introduced when a loanword or proper name is used in the sentence, which brings us back to the le do fa ra do segment from earlier. Clever viewers will have noticed that this is the name Edward approximated by solfege, a convention for naming musical pitches. Proper names are approximated with solfege syllables and paired with the loanword morpheme and a number displaying their length. All solfege syllables are lined up in the order in which they appear in the sentence. The definition of do is set to the note selected for the root of the first chord in the sentence, and then the pitches are played in the melody in order, after which the melody can be anything the composer wants. The numbers attached to proper nouns are key to understanding how many notes you have to pay attention to and where the word boundaries are, although this text only includes one of them, a 5, which can also be written as 13212 thanks to Conchord's variable-based floating point numbers. Some of you may know where this is going based on that description alone, but for those that don't, with a few exceptions, all numbers in Conchord are 9 digits long, with the first 2 informing the reader about how to parse the remaining 7. We will represent them abstractly as beta E, D1, D2, D3, D4, D5, D6, D7. Beta and E are single hexadecimal digits, with the base of the 7-digit significand at the end being equal to 16 minus beta. Note that since we're working in hexadecimal, the number that looks like 10 is actually 16. Each digit of the significand is then set to a value between 0 and 1 less than the base. The placement of the decimal point in the significand, like most trans women, depends on E. If E is 7 or lower, then E digits are to the left of the decimal point and the number is positive. However, if E is 8 or larger, then E minus 8 digits are to the left of the decimal point and the number is negative. There are 2 exceptions to the 9-digit representation of numbers. The first is that if a number is an integer between 0 and 255 inclusive, then it can just be represented as 1 or 2 hexadecimal digits. The second is if the base and exponent are specified, then all trailing zeros in the significand can be removed, as in the 13212 example from earlier. So to recap, we have a language whose morphemes are scrambled with LARS, encoded with Huffman coding, and then decoded as chords in a piece of music, all with a side of variable-based floating point arithmetic. You may be curious as to how such a bizarre language arose, and, well, remember the Turkish ice cream merchants who made dondurmaca? Though they were proud of their creation, they quickly found a fundamental flaw with it. Any ice cream used to communicate with each other was ice cream not sold to a customer, exacerbating the financial woes that inspired their revolution in the first place. Conchord was conceived as a more cost-effective, yet no less confounding alternative with which the plotters could plan their uprising. To conclude the showcase, I will play for you a short piece of music that encodes the translation we've been working with since the start. Granted, this won't be the first time you've heard it, since it's been playing on loop in the background for the entire showcase so far. The music will be played in MuseScore Studio version 4.4.1 using the MuseSounds library. Each chord change will be notated on the sheet music alongside the section of translation covered by that chord. Triple dots at a morpheme boundary indicate that the same morpheme is also covered by the preceding or following chord. Finally, solfege encoding will be labeled with the lyrics in the melody line. And so, without further ado, please enjoy this performance of I Securely Knew 3 Things.